The battlefield burned without sound. Not because the explosions had stopped, not because the war was over, but because every communication channel across the planet Killer Prime had suddenly gone silent at the exact same moment. 32 alien species, 4,000 warships, millions of soldiers, all frozen, watching one human walk through fire. Commander Vey of the Tarsan Dominion stood inside the shattered observation bunker, his claws trembling against the cracked tactical console. Outside the reinforced glass, the horizon glowed red beneath orbital bombardment. Entire mountain ranges collapsed in the distance while antimatter shells tore holes through the atmosphere itself. But none of it held his attention anymore. Only the human. The lone figure moved slowly through the inferno below. No vehicle, no escort, no armor division. Just one man wearing a scorched black combat coat. Every sensor tried to identify him. Every system failed. Impossible, whispered Vey. The battlefield AI repeated the same warning for the 9th time. Unknown entity detected. Threat level, uncalculable. Across the command room, officers stared in silence as the human stepped over burning wreckage and continued walking directly toward the Dominion front lines. No fear, no hesitation. The fires bent around him like living things afraid to touch him. One of the younger officers swallowed hard. Is that him? Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. Because every species in the galaxy knew the stories. The ghost of war. A human soldier who was supposed to be dead. A monster born during the last years of the extinction conflict. A name spoken quietly even among enemies. Captain Elias Vey. For 20 years the galaxy believed he had vanished inside the Black Nebula offensive along with an entire human fleet. Historians recorded him as dead. Memorial worlds carried his name. Human children studied his final transmission in military academies. But Vey had been there during the war. He remembered the screams over open channels. He remembered entire fleets disappearing after a single human boarding signal. He remembered planets surrendering the moment Elias Vey entered orbit. And now, he was walking out of fire itself. The Dominion soldiers began retreating before a single shot was fired. Thousands backed away instinctively, weapons lowered as primal fear spread through the trenches faster than command signals could stop it. One soldier dropped to his knees. Another started praying. The human never sped up. Step, step, step. Like death itself had chosen a direction. Suddenly, a pulse cannon fired from the eastern ridge. The plasma round screamed across the battlefield with enough force to vaporize a tank division. The human didn't dodge. The explosion swallowed him completely. White fire erupted across the valley. Shockwaves shattered nearby fortifications. Dust consumed everything. For a moment, the battlefield disappeared. Then the figure kept walking, straight through the fading plasma cloud. Unharmed. Several Dominion soldiers screamed. One officer collapsed unconscious. Inside the bunker, Vey felt cold terror grip his spine. That's not possible. But deep down he already knew the truth. The stories had never exaggerated anything. They had not exaggerated the eyes either. Cold silver. Emotionless. The eyes of a man who had watched civilizations burn too many times to fear fire anymore. Elias Vey stopped 50 meters from the front trench. Millions of enemy soldiers aimed weapons at him. Not one fired. The human looked across the battlefield slowly, almost disappointed. Then he spoke. His voice carried through open comms without amplification. I came for the architects. Every officer in the bunker froze. The architects. Only high-ranking Dominion command knew that term. The secret council responsible for starting the war. The hidden rulers manipulating entire species into conflict for profit and control. How does he know? Whispered one general. Vey already understood. Because ghosts listened. And ghosts never forgot. Suddenly, every tactical screen inside the bunker turned black. Alarms exploded everywhere. Unauthorized access detected. Command system override. The lights flickered violently. Then a single human symbol appeared across every display. A white skull burned into static. The same symbol humanity used during the extinction conflict. Entire alien civilizations once surrendered the moment that symbol appeared in orbit. No, one officer muttered in horror. The Revenant Fleet. Vey's breathing stopped. That fleet was gone. Destroyed decades ago. Every record confirmed it. Then the sky above Killer Prime darkened. Not from clouds. From ships. Massive shadows emerged from hyperspace silently, blocking entire sections of the stars above the planet. Black warships, ancient human dreadnoughts covered in battle scars. Dead ships, ships destroyed 20 years earlier, yet somehow alive. The Revenant Fleet had returned. Panic detonated across every military frequency on the planet. Dominion commanders screamed conflicting orders. Fighter wings launched blindly. Orbital defense cannons charged too late, because the human fleet was already inside firing range. And not a single ship appeared on scanners. Ghost vessels. The old nightmares were real. One dreadnought moved forward slowly through orbit. Its hull alone stretched nearly 30 kilometers. Burn marks scarred its surface like old wounds that never healed. Then its ancient designation illuminated across the darkness. HWS Thanatos. Ralvek stumbled backward. He remembered that ship. During the war, entire systems had surrendered after hearing its name alone. It was the last vessel seen entering the Black Nebula with Elias Vey before disappearing forever. Yet here it stood above them like a resurrected god of destruction. The human on the battlefield finally raised his head toward the sky. For the first time, emotion touched his face. Not anger, not pride, relief, like a soldier finally finding his way home. Then every ship in orbit transmitted the same message simultaneously across all frequencies in the galaxy. Humanity remembers. Those two words spread farther than any weapon. Across colonies, across star systems, across governments. Old veterans froze when they heard it. Ancient politicians turned pale, because humanity had not used that phrase since the darkest days of the Extinction War. It meant diplomacy was over, mercy was gone, and revenge had arrived. On Keeler Prime, Dominion Supreme Executor Varesh watched the transmission from his underground citadel nearly 5 kilometers beneath the planet's crust. His advisors shouted around him in panic. They should be dead. The fleet was destroyed. How did they survive the nebula? Varesh ignored them. His eyes stayed locked on the image of Elias Vey standing alone amid fire. The executor had ordered the Black Nebula trap himself 20 years earlier. He remembered sealing the hyperspace routes. Remembered trapping the human fleet inside a collapsing anomaly. Remembered celebrating humanity's greatest military defeat. But now, the dead had come back, and they looked angry. One trembling advisor approached carefully. Supreme Executor, should we open negotiations? Varesh stared silently for several moments. Then he noticed something that chilled his blood. Elias Vey was looking directly into the camera feed, as if he could see through the transmission itself. Then the human spoke again. Found you. The underground citadel lost power instantly. Darkness swallowed the chamber. Screams echoed everywhere. Emergency systems activated seconds later, revealing shattered monitors and terrified officers. Then the seismic alarms began. Something enormous had entered the atmosphere above the citadel. Varesh rushed toward the tactical display. His blood turned cold. The Thanatos was descending. Not firing. Descending. Straight toward the underground fortress. No, Varesh whispered. The ancient human dreadnought positioned itself directly above the mountain range hiding the citadel. Then massive mechanical structures unfolded beneath its hull. Gravity anchors. Planet Cracker class. Every Dominion officer understood immediately. The human ship wasn't attacking the fortress. It was preparing to rip the entire mountain out of the planet. Panic consumed the command center. Officers abandoned stations. Guards ran for evacuation tunnels. Some simply stood frozen in terror. Varesh clenched the console desperately. This is madness. Billions will die. A new voice answered through the speakers. Cold. Human. You taught us how. Then the mountain shook. Above the burning battlefield, Elias Vey closed his eyes as thunder rolled across Keeler Prime. The war had finally come full circle. 20 years trapped inside darkness. 20 years surviving where no human should have lived. 20 years listening to the screams of dead crews echo through broken ships drifting in endless void. The galaxy thought humanity had forgotten. But ghosts never forgot anything. And tonight, the galaxy would remember why humans became the monsters hiding in every alien war story. The mountain broke apart like glass. Entire cliffs lifted into the sky as the gravity anchors of the HWS Thanatos activated at full power. Massive chunks of stone tore free from Keeler Prime's surface while lightning-like energy cracked across the atmosphere. Dominion soldiers dropped their weapons and ran. Some screamed prayers. Others simply stared upward in disbelief. Because no modern civilization used planet cracker technology anymore. It was considered too cruel, too terrifying, too human. Deep beneath the collapsing mountains, Supreme Executor Varesh struggled to stay upright as the underground citadel shook violently around him. Evacuation routes are failing, an officer shouted. Reactor stability dropping. The human fleet has disabled orbital defense. Varesh slammed his claws against the tactical table. Fight back. Nobody moved. The officers looked terrified. Not of death. Of him. Because every commander in that room understood something Varesh refused to accept. This was not a battle anymore. This was punishment. Far above them, Elias Vey continued walking toward the shattered Dominion lines. Flames reflected across his silver eyes while destroyed vehicles burned around him. Not one enemy soldier dared stand in his path. A Dominion captain finally gathered enough courage to raise his rifle. His hands trembled uncontrollably. You should have died in the nebula. Elias stopped. For several seconds, neither man moved. Then the human answered quietly. We did. The captain's face drained of color. Before he could react, every nearby communication device suddenly emitted distorted static. Voices. Human voices. Thousands of them. Screaming. Crying. Begging. The sounds echoed across the battlefield like ghosts trapped inside broken machines. Dominion soldiers covered their ears in horror. What is that? Elias looked toward the burning sky. The dead. 20 years earlier. Black Nebula sector. The human fleet had entered the anomaly believing it was an escape route. Instead, it became a graveyard. The first ship vanished only 7 minutes after entering. No explosion. No distress signal. Simply gone. Then the nebula began moving. Not naturally. Intentionally. Captain Elias Vey remembered standing on the bridge of the Thanatos as entire stars disappeared behind living darkness. Navigation is failing. Hyperspace collapse spreading. Unknown signals approaching. Fear consumed the fleet quickly. Even veteran human crews panicked when they realized normal physics no longer existed inside the anomaly. Distances changed without warning. Time slowed in some sectors and accelerated in others. Ships drifting beside each other suddenly appeared millions of kilometers apart. Then came the whispers. At first the crews thought it was calm interference. But the voices knew names. Personal things. Regrets. Memories. One engineer heard his dead daughter singing. A pilot heard his own voice begging for help. Entire crews began hallucinating shadows moving through corridors. Then people started disappearing. Not dying. Disappearing. Locked rooms became empty. Security footage glitched. Soldiers vanished while standing beside friends. Something lived inside the Black Nebula, and it hated intruders. Back in the present, the battlefield trembled again as the Thanatos pulled more of the mountain range into the sky. The underground citadel was becoming exposed. Varesh stared upward at the cracking stone ceiling in terror. How did they survive? He whispered. A damaged officer answered shakily. Maybe they didn't. The room fell silent. Because deep down, every survivor of the old war had heard the rumors. The fleet that returned from the Black Nebula wasn't fully human anymore. On the battlefield, Elias finally reached the first trench line. Bodies and abandoned weapons surrounded him. One wounded Dominion soldier looked up fearfully from the mud. The alien was barely older than a child. Elias stopped beside him. The young soldier flinched. Please, he whispered. Please don't kill me. For the first time all night, emotion crossed Elias's face. Exhaustion. Pain. Old grief buried beneath decades of war. What's your name? Elias asked. The soldier blinked in confusion. Reth. How old are you, Reth? 16 cycles. Elias looked away silently. 16. The same age his son would have been. Before Earth burned. Before the Dominion erased entire human cities during the opening year of the war. Before Elias watched his family die beneath orbital fire. The ghost of war knelt slowly beside the terrified soldier. Then he placed the boy's dropped weapon back into his hands. Go home. The alien stared at him in disbelief. You're letting me live? Elias stood again. You were never the enemy. Nearby Dominion officers watched the scene in complete confusion. This was not the monster from their stories. This was something worse. A man who still remembered mercy after everything humanity had suffered. And somehow that frightened them even more. Suddenly the sky exploded. A Dominion battleship hidden beyond the atmosphere fired directly at the Thanatos with a spinal particle cannon. The beam split the clouds apart. The impact lit the heavens white. Cheers erupted from terrified Dominion survivors. Direct hit. We got them. But the celebration lasted less than 3 seconds. Then the smoke cleared. The Thanatos remained motionless, untouched. A massive energy barrier shimmered around the ancient dreadnought like liquid glass. The Dominion ship tried firing again. It never got the chance. One of the smaller human vessels vanished from orbit. Not moved. Vanished. A second later it reappeared directly beside the Dominion battleship. Every sensor across the planet failed trying to track it. Then the human ship fired once. A single red beam. The Dominion battleship disappeared completely. No debris. No explosion. Only empty space remained. Silence consumed the battlefield. Even the wind seemed afraid to move. One terrified officer whispered the truth aloud. They learned things inside the nebula. Elias slowly turned toward the sky again. And for a brief moment, something moved behind him. A shadow. Tall. Distorted. Not entirely human. Several Dominion soldiers saw it and stumbled backward in terror. But when they blinked, it was gone. The ghost of war continued walking as though nothing had happened. Deep within the Thanatos, Admiral June Park stood inside the darkened command chamber watching the battle unfold. Most of the ship remained without normal lighting. The crew preferred darkness now. After 20 years inside the Black Nebula, bright lights hurt their eyes. The Admiral studied Elias carefully through holographic displays. He's losing control again, one officer whispered nervously. June nodded slowly. We all are. Another tremor shook the ship. Not from battle. From below deck. Something enormous moved somewhere deep inside the ancient dreadnought. Crew members pretended not to notice. Because nobody aboard the Revenant Fleet spoke about what followed them out of the nebula. Not even humans. Especially not humans. June activated a secure channel. Captain Vey. Elias answered immediately through static-filled comms. I know. The Admiral frowned. You felt it? Yes. Silence followed. Then Elias looked toward the northern horizon. Far beyond the battlefield. Beyond the mountains. Beyond the war itself. Something was coming. And whatever it was. Even the ghost of war seemed uneasy. Suddenly, every sensor aboard the Revenant Fleet activated at once. Warning alarms screamed across human ships. Unknown signal detected. Origin, Black Nebula. Status, active. Admiral June's blood ran cold. That's impossible. Because the signal carried a message. A human voice. Distorted. Broken. Ancient. Elias. The entire command bridge froze. Elias himself stopped walking. The voice continued through every channel in the fleet. You left us behind. Several human crew members began shaking uncontrollably. One officer started crying. Because they recognized the voice. Captain Mara Lynn. Dead for 20 years. Her ship had been the first consumed by the nebula. Yet somehow, something inside the darkness was still speaking with her voice. Elias closed his eyes slowly. For the first time since returning from the nebula, the ghost of war looked afraid. The voice echoed through every ship in the Revenant Fleet. You left us behind. Crew members froze at their stations. Some stared at blank screens. Others quietly removed headsets with shaking hands. No one aboard the fleet could mistake that voice. Captain Mara Lynn, commander of the HWS Valkyrie. First ship lost inside the Black Nebula. Dead for 20 years. Admiral June Park slowly lowered his head. I watched her die. Static crackled through the bridge again. Then came another voice. A different one. Cold. A third followed immediately after. Please open the door. Then dozens more joined them. Hundreds. Human voices flooded every channel simultaneously. Crying. Begging. Screaming. Some whispered names. Some laughed. Some simply repeated the final moments of their deaths over and over again. Several younger crew members collapsed in panic. One navigator ripped off his headset and shouted, "Turn it off." "We can't," another officer yelled back. "It's inside the systems." The lights across the Thanatos flickered violently. Then all screens turned black. For one terrible moment, the only thing visible on the bridge was the reflection of terrified human faces staring into darkness. Then words slowly appeared across every monitor. "We found you." The temperature aboard the ship dropped instantly. Breath fogged in the air. Metal walls groaned softly like something enormous was pressing against the hull from outside. Far below on Keeler Prime, Elias Vey stared upward at the silent fleet. He heard the voices too. Every one of them. Especially hers. Mara Lin had been more than a fellow captain. She had been his closest friend before the war destroyed everything. He still remembered her final transmission inside the nebula. Static. Screaming. Then silence. Or at least, he thought it had been silence. A Dominion officer cautiously approached Elias across the ruined battlefield. Human. Elias didn't respond. The officer swallowed nervously. What is happening? For several seconds the ghost of war remained completely still. Then he answered quietly. We brought something back. The officer took an instinctive step backward. Because Elias did not sound proud. He sounded guilty. 20 years earlier. Black Nebula sector. The human fleet had stopped trying to escape after the first 6 months. Too many ships were gone. Too many minds broken. Time itself no longer behaved normally inside the anomaly. Days stretched into months. Months vanished in minutes. Some crew members aged rapidly. Others never aged at all. And the whispers never stopped. Captain Elias Vey remembered the exact moment hope finally died. The fleet had discovered a drifting colony ship deep inside the nebula. Human. Ancient. Impossible. Its registry identified it as the Eos Dawn, a vessel lost nearly 200 years before the Dominion War even began. Life signs still existed aboard. Against orders, Elias personally led the boarding team. He still regretted it. The interior of the colony ship looked untouched at first. Lights worked. Doors opened normally. Meals still sat on cafeteria tables. But there were no bodies. Only silence. Then they found the nursery. Children's drawings covered the walls. Thousands of them. Every drawing showed the same thing. A dark shape with glowing white eyes standing outside the ship. Watching. Waiting. One of Elias's Marines whispered nervously, Captain, something's wrong here. Then the ship spoke. Not through speakers. Through the walls themselves. Stay. The lights died instantly. Screaming erupted through the corridors. Shapes moved inside the darkness. Too tall. Too thin. Crew members vanished one by one. Elias remembered firing blindly while dragging survivors back toward the docking bay. But the shadows followed them. Not running. Walking. Slowly. Like predators certain their prey could never escape. Only 3 soldiers made it back to the Thanatos alive. And one of them killed himself before morning. Back in the present, Admiral June Park stared at the blackened monitors aboard the Thanatos. Seal lower decks, he ordered quietly. No one moved. The Admiral looked up sharply. That was an order. A nervous officer finally answered. Sir, the lower decks were sealed 15 years ago. Silence. June closed his eyes. He had forgotten. Or maybe his mind simply refused to remember. Because some sections of the ship were no longer safe for humans. Suddenly heavy footsteps echoed somewhere beneath the bridge. Slow. Metallic. Not human. Every officer turned toward the dark corridor leading deeper into the dreadnought. The footsteps stopped. Then came scratching. Long claws dragging across steel walls. One terrified crew member whispered, It found us. Before panic could spread further, the emergency lights suddenly returned. The voices vanished. The scratching stopped. All systems rebooted simultaneously. But nobody relaxed. Because the message remained burned into every screen. We found you. On the planet below, Supreme Executor Varesh finally reached an evacuation shuttle hidden beneath the collapsing citadel. His advisors crowded behind him in terror while the mountain continued tearing itself apart overhead. Hurry, someone screamed. The shuttle doors began closing, then stopped halfway. Every light inside the hangar dimmed. The pilots stared at dead controls helplessly. No power. Varesh felt cold fear crawl through his body. A new voice echoed through the hangar. Human. Calm. You should have stayed hidden. The Dominion officers slowly turned. Elias Vey stood at the entrance. No alarms had triggered. No guards had reported movement. 1 second the corridor was empty. The next second the ghost of war was there. Smoke drifted around him like living shadows. Varesh stumbled backward. That's impossible. Elias walked forward slowly. I heard that a lot tonight. The surviving guards opened fire instantly. Pulse rounds filled the hangar. The human disappeared inside the explosions, then reappeared behind them. Not running, not moving fast. Simply there. One guard collapsed before realizing Elias had drawn a weapon. Another lost his rifle arm in a flash of silver light. The remaining soldiers fled immediately. Varesh stared in horror. How are you doing this? Elias stopped only a few meters away. For the first time, real anger burned inside his silver eyes. You abandoned us in hell. The temperature inside the hangar suddenly dropped. Frost spread across the walls. And behind Elias, shapes appeared. Transparent human figures standing silently in the darkness. Dead crew members. Thousands of them. Watching. Varesh fell to his knees. No, this isn't real. One ghost stepped forward slightly. A woman in a torn human naval uniform. Captain Mara Lin. Her eyes were completely black. You left us behind, she whispered. Varesh screamed. Back aboard the Thanatos. Every alarm in the fleet activated simultaneously. Unknown anomaly detected. Location, Keeler Prime surface. Admiral June's face drained of color as tactical scans displayed impossible readings. The Black Nebula wasn't just contacting them anymore. It was opening. A massive distortion appeared above the planet's atmosphere. Space itself twisted unnaturally. Stars disappeared inside growing darkness. Dominion fleets immediately attempted retreat. They failed. Hyperspace engines shut down automatically across the system. No one was leaving. The distortion continued expanding. And deep within that living darkness, something moved. Something enormous. Even the ancient Revenant Fleet began pulling back cautiously. For the first time in decades, human ships looked afraid. Elias slowly turned toward the sky. The HWS Valkyrie drifted silently above Keeler Prime. Dead. Broken. Impossible. Entire sections of the ship were torn open as though something enormous had clawed through the hull from the inside. Pale white lights flickered behind shattered windows where thousands of unmoving human silhouettes stood watching the living below. No life signs registered. Yet the ship moved. Across Dominion and human channels alike, terror spread instantly. Because everyone knew the Valkyrie had been destroyed 20 years ago. Admiral June Park stared at the tactical display aboard the Thanatos, unable to speak. One of his officers whispered shakily, "That's her ship." June nodded slowly. "Yes." The officer swallowed hard. "Then who's flying it?" Nobody answered. Outside the bridge windows, the growing anomaly above the planet twisted space unnaturally. Darkness stretched across the stars like ink spreading through water. The Black Nebula was opening, and something inside it wanted out. On Keeler Prime's surface, Supreme Executor Varesh crawled backward across the frozen hangar floor while the ghostly figures surrounding Elias Vey slowly moved closer. Dead human officers, burned soldiers, children, civilians. Thousands of transparent faces stared silently at the Dominion ruler. "You murdered us," Mara Lin whispered. Varesh shook uncontrollably. I gave orders during war. And we obeyed ours," Elias replied coldly. The dead captain slowly stepped beside Elias. Her black eyes locked onto Varesh. "But the nebula kept us alive." The temperature dropped again. Ice spread across the walls. Varesh looked desperately toward Elias. "You can control them, can't you?" For the first time, the ghost of war looked uncertain. "No," he admitted quietly. That terrified Varesh more than anything else. Suddenly, every ghost in the hangar turned upward simultaneously. Listening. Elias felt it too. Something calling from the sky. A deep vibration rolled through the atmosphere moments later as the Valkyrie descended lower through the clouds. The dead ship was coming for the planet. Back aboard the Revenant Fleet, panic spread rapidly. "The anomaly is expanding. We're detecting additional contacts." "How many?" June demanded. The sensor officer stared pale-faced at the screen. "Thousands." Then they appeared. More ships emerged from the darkness behind the Valkyrie. Human ships. Destroyed ships. Entire fleets lost during the extinction conflict slowly drifted out of the Black Nebula, like corpses rising from an ocean grave. Some were split in half. Others burned endlessly without being consumed. One massive carrier still had bodies frozen against its outer hull. Yet all of them moved together silently. A graveyard fleet. One terrified young officer whispered the impossible thought aloud. "The dead are invading." June Park's jaw tightened. "No," he said quietly. "They're following." 20 years earlier. Black Nebula sector. The surviving human fleet had eventually discovered something horrifying about the anomaly. It learned. The darkness copied voices. copied memories, copied fear, and over time, it copied humans. Captain Elias Vey remembered the first duplicate they encountered. Corporal Haynes had died during a reactor breach 3 months earlier. Everyone watched his body burn. Then one night security cameras captured him walking through the lower decks, smiling. The crew panicked immediately. Marines cornered the thing near the cargo base. It looked exactly like Haynes. Same face, same voice, but its eyes were wrong. Completely white. Please, it begged. I'm still me. One frightened soldier lowered his rifle. The duplicate tore him apart seconds later. After that, paranoia consumed the fleet. Nobody trusted anyone. People demanded blood tests before entering command centers. Crew members slept armed. Thousands of plasma cannons lit the darkness. The dead ships never dodged. Several were hit directly. Burning holes tore through ancient hulls. But the ships kept moving, unaffected, like physics no longer mattered to them. Then the ghost fleet answered. Not with weapons, with sound. Every human vessel transmitted screams simultaneously across open space. Billions of voices crying out together. The psychic shockwave hit organic minds instantly. Dominion pilots clawed at their helmets. Officers collapsed, bleeding from their eyes. Entire crews descended into madness within seconds. Even veteran human soldiers aboard the Revenant Fleet struggled to remain conscious. Elias fell to one knee inside the hangar as memories slammed into his mind. Dark corridors, endless whispers, the faces of dead crew members staring through frozen windows. Then he heard Mara's voice again. Not the ghost beside him, the real memory. Elias, if we don't make it out. He remembered the final hours now. The thing he had forced himself to forget. The human fleet never escaped the nebula by accident. They made a deal. A terrible one. Aboard the Thanatos, Admiral June suddenly shouted. Cut all external transmissions. It's too late, an officer yelled back. The dead fleet had already surrounded the planet completely, and the anomaly continued growing. Inside the darkness, something massive slowly opened its eyes. Literal eyes, larger than warships, watching from impossible distances deep within the Black Nebula. One crew member screamed in terror. What I asked that? June answered without looking away from the display. Our jailer. Silence filled the bridge. Because every surviving member of the Revenant Fleet knew the truth. The nebula had never been natural. It was alive, ancient beyond comprehension. And humanity had survived inside it for 20 years only because Elias Vey convinced the entity to let them leave. But bargains with monsters always carried a price. On the planet below, Mara Lin's ghost stepped closer to Elias. You promised it something. Varesh looked between them desperately. What did he promise? Elias slowly closed his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded hollow. Humanity. The hangar fell silent. Varesh stared in disbelief. You traded your species? No, Elias whispered. I traded our future. The dead around them began smiling. Not kindly, hungrily. Above the planet, the massive eyes within the anomaly blinked slowly. Then a voice shook the entire system. Not spoken, felt. A voice so enormous it vibrated through bone and metal alike. The door remains open. Across Keeler Prime, millions looked up in terror as darkness spread across the sky. Stars vanished. Ships disappeared. Reality itself twisted. And from within the Black Nebula, something far worse than ghosts finally began coming through. Darkness swallowed the stars above Keeler Prime. Entire sections of space simply disappeared behind the expanding anomaly, while billions across the galaxy watched helplessly through emergency broadcasts. No one had ever seen reality bend like this. Ships drifted sideways through distorted gravity. Moons warped unnaturally. Time itself flickered. Some soldiers watched explosions freeze in midair for several seconds before continuing again. The Black Nebula was no longer far away. It was here, and something inside it was waking up. Aboard the Thanatos, Admiral June Park gripped the tactical console hard enough to crack metal beneath his hands. All fleets fall back from the anomaly perimeter. No one obeyed immediately. Not because they questioned him. Because terror had frozen entire crews in place. The massive eyes within the darkness opened wider. Ancient. Impossible. They were not attached to any visible body. Just eyes larger than continents staring through the rift like a predator peering through a doorway. Then the voice returned. Elias Vey. Across the bridge, Human officers flinched violently. Not because the entity spoke loudly, because it spoke gently, like something ancient greeting an old friend. On Keeler Prime's surface, Elias slowly looked toward the sky while cold wind swept across the ruined hangar around him. Mara Lin's ghost stood silently beside him now. Not hostile. Not human either. Varesh stared upward trembling. What does it want? Elias answered without emotion. To enter. 20 years earlier. Black Nebula sector. The surviving human fleet had finally reached the center of the anomaly after years of drifting through impossible darkness. They found a place where stars no longer existed. Only emptiness. And in the middle of that void, a gate. Massive black structures floated endlessly around it, like shattered pieces of another universe. No engines. No power signatures. Yet they moved slowly in circles around a hole in reality itself. Every human aboard the fleet heard the whispers at the same time. Welcome home. Entire crews nearly went insane instantly. Some ships turned weapons on themselves. Others tried escaping back into the nebula. None succeeded, because the gate had noticed them. Captain Elias Vey remembered standing on the bridge of the Thanatos as the darkness formed a shape for the first time. Not fully visible. A suggestion of something enormous moving behind reality itself. Then came the offer. Freedom. Safe passage home. Survival for the remaining human fleet. In exchange, a doorway. Back in the present, Elias clenched his fists tightly. We were desperate, he whispered. Mara's ghost stared at him. And now it follows the path you opened. Above the planet, the dead fleet continued emerging from the anomaly. Thousands of ancient human ships drifted silently through space like floating tombs. Then the first non-human vessel appeared. Dominion observers froze in horror. The ship was organic. Alive. Its surface pulsed like flesh while massive white eyes opened across its hull. No visible weapons. No engines. Yet reality distorted around it violently. One Dominion admiral screamed over comms. Fire everything. The combined fleets unleashed hell. Plasma. Missiles. Antimatter lances. Enough firepower to crack planets apart. The attacks vanished before reaching the creature. Not blocked. Erased. Like the universe itself refused to let the entity be harmed. Then the living ship looked toward the attacking fleet. Every Dominion vessel instantly lost power. Thousands of warships drifted dead in space. Crew members inside began screaming seconds later. Because shadows moved through their corridors. Human-shaped shadows. Admiral June watched the fleet collapse in horror. It's already inside their ships. One officer whispered shakily. How do we stop something like that? June answered honestly. I don't think we can. Below, Varesh grabbed Elias desperately. You caused this. The ghost of war did not resist. Yes. You doomed the galaxy. Elias looked toward the burning horizon. No. The galaxy doomed itself long before I made the deal. Varesh stared in confusion. Then Elias finally revealed the truth humanity had hidden for decades. The Dominion had never accidentally trapped the human fleet inside the Black Nebula. Human intelligence discovered the plan beforehand. Earth's government knew. And they still sent Elias and the fleet anyway. Because humanity was losing the war. Entire colonies burned. Civilization collapsed. Extinction was becoming inevitable. So Earth's leaders gambled everything on one impossible mission. Enter the nebula. Find power. Return with victory. We were never meant to survive, Elias said quietly. We were bait. Varesh slowly stepped backward. You sacrificed your own people. Elias's silver eyes hardened. So did you. Before Varesh could answer, the ground beneath them shook violently. The anomaly overhead expanded again. And this time, something began emerging fully. Not a ship, not a creature, a hand. Massive black fingers pushed slowly through torn reality itself, while entire fleets scattered in panic. The scale was incomprehensible. Each finger alone dwarfed capital ships. The entity was trying to physically enter the universe. Across every human ship, alarms screamed simultaneously. Containment failure imminent. June Park's face went pale. It's too soon. An officer turned toward him sharply. Containment? What containment? June hesitated. Then he spoke the secret nobody outside the Revenant Fleet knew. The ghost fleet wasn't returning home. Confusion spread across the bridge. June continued quietly. We were carrying a prison. Silence. Then understanding hit. The Black Nebula had allowed humanity to leave because the survivors themselves became part of the seal keeping the entity contained. Every Revenant ship, every surviving crew member, every ghost following them. A lock. And now the lock was breaking. On the surface below, Mara's ghost suddenly looked upward sharply. Fear crossed her face for the first time. It sees us. Elias grabbed Varesh violently and pulled him toward the evacuation tunnel. Move. Varesh stumbled in shock. You're saving me? You still need to answer for what you did. Another tremor split the planet. Entire cities in the distance collapsed as gravity distorted wildly. Above them, the giant black hand pushed farther into reality. Then the entity finally revealed its face. Millions across the galaxy screamed. Because the thing inside the nebula looked human. Or at least, it once had. Its features shifted constantly between billions of faces. Human, alien, dead, living. Like it had consumed entire civilizations and worn their identities afterward. And when it smiled, every surviving member of the Revenant Fleet heard the same words inside their minds. Thank you for opening the door. Elias stopped moving, because suddenly he understood the horrible truth. The entity never needed humanity's strength, never needed their ships, never needed their war. It needed something far simpler. A species desperate enough to invite the darkness inside willingly. And humanity had done exactly that. The giant creature's eyes locked onto Elias across impossible distance. Then it spoke directly to him one final time. You were always my favorite. Behind the ghost of war, Mara slowly reached for her weapon. Tears formed in her black eyes. Because she finally understood something too. If the doorway remained open, nothing in the galaxy would survive. And only Elias Vey still possessed the power to close it. Even if it killed him. The universe began breaking apart above Killer Prime. Storms of black lightning ripped across space while entire fleets drifted powerless beneath the expanding anomaly. Gravity collapsed unpredictably. Time fractured. Some soldiers aged years within seconds. Others watched falling debris freeze motionless in the air. And in the center of the torn sky, the entity smiled. Its massive form continued forcing itself into reality while billions across the galaxy watched in helpless terror. Every species understood the same horrifying truth at once. This was not an invasion. This was extinction. On the surface below, Elias Vey stood motionless beneath the collapsing heavens while Mara Lynn slowly raised her weapon behind him. Her black eyes trembled. You know what has to happen, she whispered. Elias closed his eyes. Yes. Varesh stared between them in confusion. What are you talking about? The ghost of war looked toward the sky one final time. The doorway was linked to me. The Dominion ruler froze. Elias continued quietly. When I made the deal in the nebula, it marked me as the anchor. Every surviving member of the Revenant Fleet suddenly understood why Elias always stayed separated from the others. Why the whispers followed him most strongly. Why the shadows appeared around him. Why the anomaly reacted whenever he entered battle. He was never just a survivor. He was the key. Mara's voice shook slightly. If the anchor dies, the door closes. Silence filled the ruined hangar. Then Varesh stepped backward in horror. No, there has to be another way. Elias almost smiled. That's what we said 20 years ago. Above them, the giant entity pushed farther into reality. Entire continents darkened beneath its shadow while dead fleets drifted around it like worshippers surrounding a god. Then the creature looked downward, straight at Elias. And for the first time, it became angry. You belong to me. The voice shattered mountains across Killer Prime. Billions screamed as psychic pressure rolled through the galaxy like a tidal wave. Entire fleets lost consciousness instantly. But Elias remained standing. Slowly, the ghost of war removed the old combat knife from his belt. The same blade he had carried since the beginning of the extinction conflict. Mara stepped closer. You can't hesitate. Elias looked at her silently. For a brief moment, the terrifying legend vanished. Not the ghost of war, just a tired human being. I'm afraid, he admitted softly. Mara's expression broke. So was everyone else. Then she smiled sadly. But you walked through the fire anyway. Tears formed in Elias's silver eyes for the first time in 20 years. Around them, ghostly human figures slowly appeared across the battlefield. Thousands. The lost crews of the Black Nebula. The dead of the Revenant Fleet. Men, women, children, all watching silently. Not demanding, Waiting. One by one, the ghosts placed their hands over their hearts. A final salute to the man who carried them home. Far above, Admiral June Park watched through the Thanatos command deck with trembling hands. The bridge crew stood in total silence. No orders. No fear anymore. Only grief. June opened a fleet-wide channel. Every surviving human ship immediately joined. Across thousands of vessels, soldiers stood at attention. The admiral's voice cracked as he spoke. Captain Elias Vey. He stopped briefly, struggling to continue. Permission to bring you home, sir. Elias heard the transmission through the static-filled air. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he smiled faintly. A real smile this time. Denied. June lowered his head. Several crew members began crying openly, because they already knew what Elias meant. Home was the one place the ghost of war could never return to again. The entity roared as darkness spread farther across reality. Don't leave me again. Elias finally looked upward. You should have let humanity die. Then he drove the knife into his own chest. The universe screamed. Not metaphorically. Literally screamed. The sound exploded across every star system simultaneously as the anomaly convulsed violently. The giant entity recoiled in sudden agony while black cracks spread across its body. The doorway was collapsing. No, the creature thundered. Ghosts across the battlefield suddenly ignited with white light. Mara stepped forward one final time beside Elias as her form began dissolving into glowing particles. Thank you, she whispered. Elias fell slowly to his knees. Memories flashed through his mind. Earth before the war. His wife laughing beside the ocean. His son reaching for his hand. The faces of lost crews drifting through endless darkness. Then silence. Real silence. For the first time in 20 years, the whispers were gone. Above Keeler Prime, the giant entity desperately clawed at reality while the anomaly collapsed around it. Dead ships shattered into light. Ghost fleets vanished. The Black Nebula began folding inward. And every ghost looked peaceful at last. The creature screamed Elias's name one final time as the doorway sealed shut forever. Then everything disappeared. The stars returned. The storms ended. And silence fell across the galaxy. Hours later, rescue teams cautiously searched the ruined battlefield beneath the broken mountains of Keeler Prime. No bodies remained. Not of Elias. Not of the ghosts. Only the old combat knife rested alone in blackened ash. Supreme Executor Varesh stared at it silently. Then, slowly, the Dominion ruler knelt. Not before a conqueror. Not before an enemy. Before the human who saved the galaxy after condemning himself to hell twice. Years later, children across dozens of worlds would hear the story. The story of the human who walked through fire. The soldier who entered darkness so others would never have to. Some called him a monster. Some called him a hero. But throughout the galaxy, history remembered him by only one name. The Ghost of War. And whenever veterans spoke about humanity afterward, they always lowered their voices for the final part. Because every witness swore the same thing happened on the night Elias Vey died. Just before the anomaly vanished completely, a single human figure was seen walking calmly into the darkness. Not afraid, as if somewhere beyond the stars, the war was still not over.